channel. It's Eppanine, aka Epi, aka I am so freaking excited to finally be getting this video recorded and posted for you guys. For today's video, I wanted to do something that wasn't a really well-known story, and it wasn't something that everybody has known about. So I picked the story of Nathaniel Levi Bar-Jonah, who, up until I started doing research, I had never heard about. And I would like to think my knowledge of like true crime cases and serial killers and stuff like that is pretty extensive. I spend a lot of time reading about this stuff and watching documentaries about this stuff and just learning as much as I can. For some reason, the psychology of it all is really interesting. And this is somebody that I'd never heard about. And for me to find a story that is as crazy as this one that I've never heard about, I knew this is the one I had to make a video on. Now, I will warn you before I start telling the story that it does deal with some sensitive subject matter. So if you are sensitive to sexual assault or rape or violence or anything like that, then this is probably not going to be the video for you, and probably not the series for you, so I would just stick to unboxings. But if you are the kind of person like me who's maybe a little bit messed up in the head and who finds this stuff really interesting, then be prepared to be really aggravated and really irritated. I know I was, just because of how poorly this whole thing was handled, but we'll get into all of that as I tell the story. I feel like this is a really cliche thing to say, but everybody says it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So, Nathaniel Levi Bar-Jonah was born with the name David Paul Brown on February 15th, 1957, and he was born in Worcester, Massachusetts. I know his name was David. He goes by Nathaniel later, and we will get into that in the story, but for the sake of just keeping things consistent, I'll be calling him Nathaniel or Bar-Jonah, just so you guys know who I'm talking about. So, from a young age, Nathaniel had kind of weird habits that made people a little bit leery of him. He would pick at scabs, which isn't super uncommon. I do that too. Gross. I know. But he would pick at scabs, but the part that was kind of gross was that he would like suck the blood out of them, and he would do it to the point where it really freaked out the people around him, and they actually had to contact his mom on multiple occasions and ask her to talk to him and get him to stop doing that. So in 1964, when Bar-Jonah was 7 years old, he tried to lure a little 5-year-old girl into the basement of his house using a Ouija board as like bait to kind of tempt her. He told her that he had gotten the board for his birthday and that he could talk to ghosts with it. So she went into the basement with Bar-Jonah, and at this point he attempted to suffocate her or strangle her. The details are a little bit confusing article to article, but tried to kill her, deprive her of oxygen in one way or another, and she started screaming, and Bar-Jonah's mom actually heard this and decided to come downstairs, and she was able to stop the attack. So the little girl went back home, but as far as I could find, nothing was really done about this. So in January 1970, Bar-Jonah lured a 6-year-old boy to a secluded area, claiming that he wanted to go sledding with him. Once he got him alone, he sexually assaulted him, and again, nothing happened. He also got away with this scot-free. So this is twice in his life, by the time he was 13 years old, that he had tried to kill somebody or sexually assault somebody, and so far nothing has happened. So a few years later, Bar-Jonah tried to lure 2 boys into a cemetery, which isn't sketchy at all, right? He planned on killing them in the cemetery, but on the way there, one of the boys just got kind of leery and realized this is probably not a good situation or a man that we should be following into a cemetery of all places, and he convinced his friend not to go, so they left on their bikes. So a little bit later, in March 1975, Bar-Jonah pretended to be a police officer, and he used his disguise to abduct a little boy named Richard O'Connor, who was 8 years old at the time. When O'Connor was on the way to school, Bar-Jonah had kidnapped him by bringing him into the car, and he had sexually assaulted and strangled him. A neighbor looking out the window noticed the abduction when it happened, and they called the cops. So the cops were on the lookout, and they managed to find a car that matched the description of Bar-Jonah's car. Now, when they found the car, they ordered Bar-Jonah out of the car, and in the back seat, they found Richard O'Connor, and he was in pretty rough shape. He had urinated and defecated on himself. He was bleeding from the attack, and he was really close to death. So this was a brutal, violent attack. But one good thing did come out of this, and that is that there was some sort of punishment for Bar-Jonah as a repercussion of this. Not much, but he was placed on probation, so there's at least hints of the law getting involved. So a few days before he graduated high school, Bar-Jonah drove to Hartford, Connecticut, where he once again impersonated a police officer, and he then abducted a 9-year-old girl and brutally assaulted her, both physically and sexually. The girl began to vomit and have convulsions in his car because of how serious the attack is, and instead of finding help, because he's not going to do that because that's going to implicate himself in the crime, Bar-Jonah just threw the girl out of his car onto a sidewalk and just left her there. Luckily, a nearby witness called the police and gave them Bar-Jonah's license plate number, and he was arrested for this crime, but since it was in Connecticut and not where he was from, his probation officer never found out about it, and he was actually released from probation shortly after this and received a letter from his PO thanking him for his cooperation. So while he was on probation, he had assaulted another girl, horribly assaulted her, and then had received a letter thanking him for his cooperation, which is so aggravating to me. So on September 24th, 1977, again, in a police disguise, this seems to be kind of his thing right now, Bar-Jonah had convinced 2 boys that he was in the FBI and he was able to abduct them, and this was in the town of Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Once the 2 boys were in his car, he drove them to a secluded area where he abused them, assaulted them, both sexually and physically. Now, I will tell you, the details in this part are a little bit fuzzy because each story was a little bit different. So I'm going to try to give you guys the most accurate representation here, but if I am mistaken on anything, please correct me in the comments. Please let me know. But he had assaulted them sexually, physically, was just being a horrible person, to the point where he had thought that he had killed one of them. It's unknown whether this was on purpose or as just a result of the abuse. It's hard to figure out exactly. But the one who Bar-Jonah had thought he had killed laid there and played dead. While his friend was still being abused, while Bar-Jonah was flicking cigarette ashes on them, while all of this horrific things was going down, he pretended to be dead, and Bar-Jonah had jumped up and down on them. He was 375 pounds, and he had been jumping up and down on them. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's just crazy. Trying to think of what these boys have gone through in this situation is just crazy to think about. But after this happened, Bar-Jonah had thought he killed one of the boys, so he left the boy behind. He wasn't going to take a dead person with him. That didn't make sense. But the other boy, who was alive, he put into the trunk of his car and he drove off. Now, luckily, the first boy, who was still alive, was able to go find help. And luckily, they were able to find Bar-Jonah, and the other boy was discovered in the trunk of his car, still alive. So this act was finally a little bit too much for Bar-Jonah to be able to get away with again. There was obviously too much evidence. They had the little boy right here. I'm sure there was DNA on him. They found a boy in the trunk of Bar-Jonah's car. So there really wasn't any getting away with it this time for him. So for these acts, he actually was convicted of attempted murder, and he received the maximum sentence for that crime, which was 18 to 20 years in prison. However, this guy seems to have a lucky streak beyond what I could even begin to comprehend, because shortly after being booked into prison, he was transferred to the Bridgewater State Hospital, and it was here that he had picked the name Nathaniel Levi Bar-Jonah for himself. Remember, up until this point, he had been living under the name David Paul Brown, which was his birth name. So he picked the name Nathaniel Levi Bar-Jonah, and the name change was official on March 22nd of 1984. There were a few different reasons that I could find for this name change. He told some friends and relatives that he wanted to know what it felt like to be persecuted as a Jewish man. Another report was that he actually was Jewish and wanted to honor his Jewish heritage. However, as far as I can find, there wasn't even reports that he was Jewish, so maybe he just changed his name because his previous name was kind of tarnished by this point. So later that year in 1984, Superior Court Judge Walter E. Steele, great judge, had ruled that Massachusetts failed to prove that Bar-Jonah was dangerous, and he was released from the Bridgewater State Hospital. You heard that right, ladies and gentlemen. He was released. Even though he had told his psychiatrists while he was undergoing treatment that he had a deep fascination and curiosity about human flesh and what it tasted like and what it would be like to eat it. And even though he admitted to having numerous fantasies involving murder and cannibalism, they let him go. Even though he continued to pick at his scabs, suck his blood, and just be an all-around really deranged, gross person, they let him go. The only stipulation was that he had to go live with his mom in Great Falls, Montana. Easy enough. So on August of 1991, a month after being released from Bridgewater, Bar-Jonah attacked yet another kid 1 month after getting out. He noticed that there was a 7-year-old boy sitting alone in a car outside of a post office in Oxford, Massachusetts, which is not Montana, where he was supposed to be with his mom. And he opened the door and sat on top of the kid, attempting to crush him. Remember, Bar-Jonah was, between 350 and 400 pounds. He was a very large man. So the boy's mom, among other witnesses, saw him and stopped the attack, obviously. Originally, Bar-Jonah had tried saying that it was just cold outside and he sat in the car to get warm. But then once the cops showed up and they started questioning him, he admitted that, he wanted to kill the boy. He was trying to kill the boy. And for this, he was sentenced to probation. That's it. Just probation. Now, the final straw for Bar-Jonah was when he was arrested again in 1999, originally for impersonating an officer. But after the cops grew suspicious of him, they got warrants for his place of residence. And after they searched his house, they found pictures of kids who were cut out of magazines, which is just creepy for a grown man to have pictures of kids like that. They found journals that were all written in this weird code that they couldn't understand. And then among some of the other things that they found was a bone that was actually identified to be a human bone. So with this, they had charged him with kidnapping and multiple charges of sexual assault, just based off of the evidence that was found in his apartment. So I will apologize for this next part. It's not super clear. I urge you to do more research into this case if it's something you're curious about. But after being arrested that last time, he was prosecuted for the abduction and the molestation of 3 boys, and he was convicted of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and sexual assault. And then during the court process and everything, it came out that he even went as far as to hang boys from his ceiling while he assaulted them. It's reported that some pretty crazy stuff went down. So for the crimes that Bar-Jonah was arrested and convicted of and went to trial for, he was convicted. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 130 years in prison, which doesn't sound like nearly enough years for what he put these people through. However, with his age and with his health, 130 years did prove to be a death sentence for him, or a life sentence. You know what I'm trying to say. Because on the morning of April 13th, 2008, he was found unresponsive in his cell, and it was determined that he died of heart issues due to his weight. So all of this is crazy, but I didn't want to just give you guys a kind of crazy story. I wanted to give you guys a really crazy story. So this is where we're going to take it to that next level that just makes it jaw-dropping and nauseating to think about. We're going to take a detour really quick, and we're going to travel back in time to February 6th of 1966. So on this day, there was a little 10-year-old boy named Zachary Ramsey who left his apartment around 7:35 a.m. to go to school. just along his normal route. Nothing crazy, just everything as per usual. So a family of 3 who lived in the apartment with a view of the alleyway reported that they saw Ramsey that morning and that he was almost ran off the road by an all-white 4-door car. Another witness says that they saw Ramsey standing in the alley and it looked like he was waiting for somebody or expecting somebody. Like, he wasn't just casually standing there. It looked like he was waiting for somebody. That's why he was there. Somebody else said that they saw him around 7:45 in the morning and that there was a very large man following behind him and that Ramsey looked distressed. Like, Zachary looked like he was distressed. Now, as we all know, Bar-Jonah was a very, very obese man. Another neighbor said that they actually saw Bar-Jonah in the alleyway around 7:15 in the morning wearing a dark blue police-like jacket. So it's not crazy to think that he was just using this as a disguise again, because he'd done this on multiple occasions already. So even with all of these reports, it's never been found what happened to Zachary Ramsey. Now, obviously, people think that Bar-Jonah was responsible for it. However, through the court cases and everything like that, it was never able to actually be proven. But it's kind of common belief that he did. And even though his mom has protested against it, a judge did declare Zachary Ramsey legally dead in the year 2011. Now, investigations that happened years after the disappearance showed that Bar-Jonah had access to his mother's off-white 4-door 1978 Toyota Corolla, which matches the description, the day that Ramsey went missing. It's also determined that his mother was out of town during that time, so he could have gone. And that Bar-Jonah did not work the day before Zachary Ramsey's disappearance or the days following his disappearance. And just to put the nail in the coffin even more, while they were searching the apartments, the detective found a list of boys' names, and it had Zachary Ramsey written on that list with the word died following it. And people had said that Bar-Jonah would randomly bring Zachary Ramsey up in conversation for no apparent reason. And now, I had mentioned earlier that in Bar-Jonah's notebooks, there was some sort of code that everything was written in. And the detectives could not understand what it meant for the longest time. But finally, after months of working with the FBI, they were decoded. And in the notebooks, it was horrific, you guys. Bar-Jonah had talked about torturing people. He talked about killing people. And this is where it gets disgusting. He talked about eating people. And not just eating people in like a generic sense of eating people. There was actually recipes that he'd written that had body parts in them and instructions on how to cook children. And there were titles in there for recipes such as Little Boy Pot Pie, French Fried Kid, and then weird phrases like lunch is served on the patio with roasted child. These were real entries in there. And the grossest part is that Bar-Jonah had even referenced feeding these recipes to his neighbors, which sounds disgusting, but there is reports that after Ramsey went missing, Bar-Jonah started to do a lot of cookouts for his neighbors. And at his cookouts, he would make things like burgers and pot pies and things that required meat. And the neighbors were reported to have told him that this meat tasted a little strange and it was a little weird. Bar-Jonah just insisted that it was deer meat, that he'd gone hunting himself, even though he had no hunting license and he'd never owned a hunting weapon. So it's actually believed that Bar-Jonah possibly killed Zachary Ramsey, cooked him, and fed him to his neighbors without his neighbors even knowing about it. And to make this kind of even more believable is the fact that there was a meat grinder found in his apartment with human hair inside of it. So who knows how many people Bar-Jonah actually could have tortured or killed or assaulted or eaten. So I don't know, you guys. I don't even know what to think about that case. I'm sorry if this was a little confusing. This was a really hard case for me to find a whole lot of information on, and some of the information that I found was kind of conflicting. So I've done my best to try to piece everything together and give you guys the most accurate representation of everything that I can find. But like I said, if I missed anything or if I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and be sure to let me know in the comments if you have any topics that you would like me to talk about. I'm really open-minded, and I really just want to have a lot of fun with this channel. So thank you guys for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe and hit the bell notifications if you have not already. And until next time, I love you all, and we'll touch base soon. Bye!